My name is Carlo Treviso. I'm the author of the new historical thriller novel titled Siciliana. And I just want to first say, thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure and honor to be here speaking with you all today. I thought I'd start by speaking for about 30 minutes and then open up the floor to questions and have more of a dialogue, which I always find to be quite fun. So my name is Carlo Treviso, and I'm named after my late grandfather, my Nanu, the original Carlo Treviso. So in the Treviso family, I'm actually the firstborn son to be born on American soil, and as such, I received the great honor of carrying on my Nanu's name. So Nanu was a shipwright from Porticello, Sicily, which is a small fishing village outside of Palermo. He built all kinds of boats by hand, fishing boats, rowboats. He took great pride in his work and used to say, "It's not the blade that makes the man, it's the man that makes the blade." And this was in reference to his adze, which was considered a shipwright's most important tool. Nanu was a skilled carpenter and was as tough as nails, pun intended, but underneath he was incredibly creative. He had the soul of an artist. So, and in the early 70s, my Nanu moved the whole family from Porticello to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where there was a growing community of Sicilian immigrants there. And as a shipwright, Nanu was not at all shy about his love and appreciation for Venetian gondolas. He loved the Venetian gondolas, their sleek design, their elegant allure. And when I was a child, I had the impressionable experience of watching my Nanu build 3 gondolas in his garage alongside my dad and uncle. My uncle there, pictured there down in the corner. And my Nanu actually launched the gondolas on the Milwaukee River as a small business. This was my Nanu's not so subtle way of saying, I love my culture and I'm going to celebrate and conserve it through my creativity. On the left there is a picture of the former Milwaukee mayor who is christening one of the bows. And there on the right, the gondolas were even featured in a brochure photo shoot for the Milwaukee Tourism Bureau. And they quickly became known as the darling of Milwaukee. And not even a year later, Nanu partnered with Milwaukee's oldest cultural festival called Festa Italiana. And they offered rides to festival goers on the lakefront lagoon. And I thought it would be fun to show you a really quick news clip from one of the stories that they covered there. So here we go.
Festa Italiana, Milwaukee's oldest ethnic festival, captures the spirit of Italy.
And one family of gondola makers rose in the romance of Venice to Milwaukee shores. Tracy Robinson has the story.
Newlyweds Rosa and Carlo Testa from Sicily are honeymooning here in Milwaukee, and to their delight, they found a romantic reminder of their homeland, the gondola. Cousin Rose Cornelison translates.
It's kind of nostalgic for them also to come and see this and to be able to go on a ride like this, to go on the gondola.
The Venetian-style boats are built by Milwaukee's very own Treviso family of gondoliers.
We just trying to bring back a little piece of Italy, of Venice, so to speak, on the Milwaukee River.
Father Carlo and brothers Gantano and Antonio build the boats in their garage as a hobby. So far, the Trevisos have built 3 gondolas at a cost of $7 months and $8,000 each.
It gives you a romantic feeling that, you have to go to Venice to experience the same thing.
So if you can't afford a flight to Venice, you can enjoy a romantic ride on a gondola right here in Milwaukee for about $11 per person.
Oh, sole mio, sta pronta a te.
The Trevisos say they've witnessed dozens of marriage proposals on the gondolas, and for newlyweds Rosa and Galogero, the gondola is a romantic ride they wish they could take all the way back to Italy. Tracy Robinson, TV6 News, Milwaukee.
Ah, what a voice. What would a gondola ride be without somebody singing, right? So this is a photo of my 2 younger sisters and I actually sitting in one of those gondolas shortly after they were first launched. And sitting there in that red velvet seat, little did I realize that witnessing my Nanu accomplish such an inspiring feat would instill in me certain values that I would carry with me for the rest of my life. So like a young squire being knighted by an old master, my Nanu instilled me with the values of celebrating our culture through acts of creativity and conservation. It would then become my oath as a true Sicilian knight to follow in his footsteps and live out these values. When I was 12 years old, I wrote and published my first novel. It had a print run of 1 copy. It was written by hand in blue ink. and it was bound together in 3 spiral notebooks, complete with chapter headings and illustrations. The novel was titled The Fantasy. It was a historical thriller, of course. And, since you guys seem like a great crowd, I thought it'd be fun to do a little 30-minute dramatic reading for you today, but perhaps I'll save that for a future talk. As I mentioned, I'm the first generation son of a Sicilian immigrant family, and growing up, when I would mention my Sicilian heritage to anyone unfamiliar with its past, the typical response usually included some use of that notorious M word. Oh, like the mafia, hey, Godfather Carlo. And mention Sicily in literature or film, and one might imagine that aging Don stroking a white cat or a low-level mobster running a casino. More often than not, Sicilians are portrayed in popular entertainment in a negative context. Gangsters, grifters, hustlers. And I always thought that my Sicilian heritage deserved better than how it was depicted in popular entertainment and the media. So as a lifelong lover of fiction and cinema, I decided that the only way to confront these negative perceptions was to change the narrative altogether. As Joseph Campbell once said, if you want to change the world, change the story. Enter my historical thriller novel, Siciliana. I decided to write a novel about Sicily that had nothing to do with the mafia. I wanted to tell a new kind of story, a story that transported the reader to 13th century Sicily, to chronicle a turbulent and brutal period in the island's history, while also celebrating the courage, culture, and heritage of its people. So through a rich blend of imagination and actuality, I set out to depict a vivid account of the struggle for a Sicilian nation, or as I like to say in the book, an exquisite realm of forbidden knights, forgotten fortresses, and fallen kings. I'd like to take you to a very specific date in Sicilian history. So Siciliana takes place in the year 1282. And at that time, the French actually occupied Sicily. So as you may or may not know, Sicily's been conquered by every civilization in the Mediterranean, from the Greeks to the Romans, the Arabs to the Normans. And by 1282, that was the French, or Angevins as they were known. And the Angevins were very abusive to the people. There were a lot of cases of rape and molestation, very vulgar acts against the people. And everything changed on March 30th, the evening of Easter Vigil, known as Vespers. So as the Sicilian people came together to celebrate in Palermo, the French soldiers kind of showed up drunk, belligerent. They essentially crashed the party, and they started bullying the men and molesting the women. And the legend goes that one woman allegedly took out her stiletto blade, which was essentially a short sword. She stabbed a French soldier and she cried, "Murano li Francesi," which means death to the Angevins. And at that moment, all of the Sicilians of Palermo took out their blades and cried, "Yeah, death to the Angevins." And what preceded was a very intense uprising in the city, where the people of Palermo essentially slaughtered 12,000 French soldiers, men, women, anybody who spoke French. There's a famous story about a fatal verbal test that they conducted to root out hidden French citizens. They would cry, "Say chicheri," or chickpea. And if a French accent was detected, the person's throat was slashed from ear to ear. It was a complete massacre, which turned into a larger revolution across the island. And for a brief moment in time, the Sicilians actually took back Sicily from the French. And that is until the Spanish eventually came and conquered them again, unfortunately. So as I mentioned, I grew up with 2 younger sisters and was surrounded by a lot of strong women in my family. I have a huge respect for the strong female hero, and decided early on that I wanted to write Siciliana to be told through a distinctly feminist lens, by centering the story around the woman who would eventually spark that Sicilian Vespers uprising. So Siciliana tells the harrowing tale of a young woman named Etna Vesperi. She was born the daughter of a revered Sicilian knight, and as a child, she witnesses the destruction of her father's vineyard by Angevin soldiers. It's not until years later in Palermo, as the evening bells are tolling for Vespers, when Etna fends off a nefarious Angevin sergeant and essentially sparks the people's uprising, known as the Sicilian Vespers. Here, Etna soon finds herself fighting not only for a nation she believes in, but also for the meaning of family. And it's here in her darkest hour that this dauntless Sicilian woman steps out of obscurity and into the pages of history. And so the legend of Siciliana is born. Now, as a fun fact, in writing Etna Vesperi, I took inspiration from my own sister, Andrea. I intentionally incorporated my sister's appearance, personality, strength, wittiness. Etna herself then, you could say, becomes a tribute to my own family, or my sister, Andrea, to whom I actually also dedicate the book. So I dedicate the book to my sister. Now, on top of this broader revolution story, I wanted to kind of give you a taste for the various cultural influences that take place in Sicily. I talk about the Greek influence, the Arab influence, the Norman influence. And the Greeks, for example, they were a culture that brought grapes to the island. So Mount Etna, as you may know, is the largest volcano in Europe, and the volcano provides the perfect condition for growing grapes. It's fast draining, it's full of nutrients from the lava, and what you get is this really cindery, berry-like red wine known as Etna Rosso. Though it was the Arab conquest that I think brought all of the best stuff. They introduced things like arancini and pinelli and pistachio, cannoli, that famous cannoli. They even brought gelato, or I should say they perfected the process of making gelato. So you might be wondering, how did they make gelato on an island that was scorching hot? Well, it's actually quite simple. You go up to the mountains, you collect some snow, you come back down, you mix it with milk and fruit and nuts, and what you get is a very rudimentary form of ice cream or gelato. And with the Normans, of course, they built all of those opulent fortress-like palaces and cathedrals that you can currently see in Palermo. And that's actually where the first Sicilian poetry school was eventually created by the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II. A lot of history there. And throughout the book, I actually visit this recurring theme that Sicily was the original melting pot of the Mediterranean, a human stew of cultures and civilizations, so to speak. And that scary looking guy there in the corner, he represents the dangerous French villain known as General Guy de Rushford. So in the novel Siciliana, Rushford is a blood-hungry, genocidal warmonger. And his big plan is to eradicate all of the Sicilians from the island. And throughout the story, he frequently refers to Sicilians as having dirty blood. He says they have the blood of gypsies, which is obviously an insult to the Sicilians, and it's used to describe the mishmash of cultures that make up their bloodline. So I thought it'd be fun to show you a little screenshot of my actual DNA breakdown, which you can see here. You can see my lovely Sicilian cocktail. While it's 75% Italians and Sicilian, you can see there's a little Greek, there's a little Levantine, a little North African. And all these areas represent the various conquerors and cultures in Sicily over the past millennia. So suffice it to say, if General Rochefort here were standing here right behind me, he would likely want my pretty little head on his chopping block. So throughout the book, one of the first comments I usually hear about the book is about the book's cover. People usually say, you know what, you have this really intriguing book cover with this horrifying picture of Medusa. What's that all about? And basically what the cover represents is a modernized interpretation of the Sicilian flag, or Trinacria. And as part of Siciliana, I wanted to give the reader a taste for how this flag could have come into existence, because there's not a lot of historical record about who designed this flag or where it really came from. So I used the opportunity in the book to have Etna Vesperi, the Siciliana, essentially design a Sicilian flag as she's going through her journey. So at that time, you know, Sicily was kind of tribal. People were spread out by villages. There wasn't really a strong sense of unification. And on her journey, Etna decides, you know what, Sicily needs an identity, and I'm going to create a flag for us that we can wave as we head out to face the French in battle. And as the story progresses, you get the breadcrumbs of how this flag was created, which I tie into the various narrative themes explored in the book. So Medusa, as you know, Medusa is an ancient Greek character, the maiden turned monster turned myth, much like the hero Siciliana herself. And in the original story, Medusa was a beautiful Sicilian woman. And the story goes, she was taking a walk one day along the shore when Poseidon, the god of the sea, saw her, thought she was so beautiful, and said, I must have her. And he unfortunately accosted her. But now Medusa was eventually rescued by Athena, who was the goddess of wisdom. But this is where the story gets funny. So as a punishment to Poseidon, she turns Medusa into a demon, which is weird. So she turns Medusa into a demon, but that was actually an act to help protect her. She gave her this power to turn men into stone, which would protect her from all of these men trying to come after her. And as such, she eventually became a symbol of protection against evil. So if you go to Sicily today, you'll see a lot of imagery of Medusa on vases and cloths, and that's because it was originally considered a totem to help ward off evil. So with the troskele, there are essentially two meanings behind the symbol. As you may know, the first meaning essentially is it represents the 3 points of the island of Sicily. So Sicily is an island, and that's essentially a triangle with 3 points. But there's another more dramatic meaning behind this symbol. So in the Mount Etna region of Sicily, there is this term called simu sufaru, which means we are nothing but sulfur. And simu sufaru essentially basically means that Sicilians are helplessly strewn about the earth like sulfur from a volcano. Very helpless. And in Siciliana, Etna's father teaches her that she must fight that perception. He points to the troskele's 3 legs and reminds her that no matter where you throw a Sicilian, they will always land on their feet. Conquerors can keep kicking us through the annals of history, but we will always land standing. And that's what those 3 legs spinning represent. And finally, the artichoke buds. So this is a very controversial element that I feature on the cover because a lot of people say that those buds on the Sicilian flag are actually wheat ears. Some people even say that they're corn ears. And I've gotten a lot of feedback and questions about why did you include artichokes on the Sicilian flag? Wikipedia says those are wheat ears. Well, there's actually a very specific historical connotation for this. So at the heart of the book, and this is going to be a bit of a pun, is around this term called koska. And koska in Sicilian means artichoke, hence the heart. And the artichoke, as you know, has layered leafy blades over the top of it, per se, protecting the fruit, which essentially becomes a metaphor for the Sicilian family unit. So back in that day, everyone carried a stiletto blade, which were short swords, basically. And with the blade of the stiletto is how you protected your family. So when all of the Sicilians came together with their blades, they created that koska, or artichoke, of the family. So on top of this broader revolution story in the novel, you get this kind of contemplation of what it means to be koska, what it means to be a true Sicilian family. And you might even recognize that word Cosa Nostra, which the mafia uses to describe themselves, and that's derived from the same concept. And if you actually look closely at an image of the Sicilian flag, I think it looks a lot more like an artichoke than it does an ear of wheat, which is longer and more feathery. So growing up, one of my favorite books was The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And there's a famous story about the author Victor Hugo, who wrote the novel. And he wrote the novel to actually help save Notre Dame Cathedral, which was at that time crumbling over the centuries from neglect and vandalism. And Hugo felt that if he wrote an exciting story that took place around Notre Dame, that it would inspire the citizens of Paris to essentially rise up and protect their Gothic heritage. He said famously when he was releasing the book, a universal cry must finally go out to call the new French to the aid of the old. And like Mr. Hugo, it so happens that I had a very similar approach to writing Siciliana. So before I'm an author, I like to consider myself a conservationist. I have a deep passion for conserving history, culture, environment. I'm an active supporter of conservation organizations like UNESCO and the World Wildlife Fund. And I wanted to incorporate that mission into this book as a sort of secondary mission. So as you may know, UNESCO is a program run by the UN, and it protects ancient sites around the world from war, vandalism, destruction. And in Sicily, there are about 7 UNESCO heritage sites. For example, in the city of Palermo, Palermo Cathedral is a Norman-built cathedral. And I wrote many of the scenes in the book to be set against these real locations. So you can actually go there. You can walk around where the characters walked. You can see where the battles were fought. And I wanted readers to be able to read the book and then go to Sicily and actually experience these places for real. And you can say, oh, look, this is the cathedral where Etna held her rally. Or this is the slope on Mount Etna where the Sicilians fought the French. I wanted to give readers a real sense of appreciation that these places really exist and you can visit them today and help conserve them for years to come. These are actually photos from my sister Andrea, who took a trip to Sicily this past summer. You can see here, she brought the book with her. What a perfect read to go to Sicily and, read Siciliana on the actual land that it takes place. So she took pictures in front of the actual locations where this book takes place. You'll see Palermo Cathedral here, Mount Etna, Taormina Greek Theater. Taormina is where the third act climax of the book takes place. There's a big action battle scene where the people of Taormina essentially follow the example of Palermo and rise up against their oppressors as well. And on the environment side, the World Wildlife Fund has a program in Sicily that protects Sicily's native birds of prey. That program is called Life Kan Rossi. So I decided to incorporate eagles and eagle symbolism into the story as well. So you get the sense that eagles are also native to this island and that there's this effort to protect them as well. So these two missions, historical preservation and environmentalism, essentially collide in this character known as Don Rapachi. So in the book, Don Rapachi is a mysterious knight who works in the shadowy streets of Palermo to essentially terrorize and assassinate unsuspecting Angevin soldiers. As a self-appointed vigilante and protector, he essentially makes it his life mission to protect Sicily's culture against the French, who are desecrating and outlawing all of their traditions and way of life. He lives in a hidden cave on Monte Pellegrino, where he stores banned artifacts like tapestries and marionettes. And he also has a companion, the golden eagle, Rosalia. He practices falconry. He studies the art of falconry. So he kind of represents, Don Rapachi represents that kind of mission of preserving history and also preserving environments, collided in one guy. So it goes without saying that Don Rapachi might actually be my favorite character. While Etna and the Siciliana represents kind of my sister's spirit, I like to think that Don Rapachi represents myself. Now, I'd like to play you a small excerpt from the Siciliana audiobook experience. The entire novel was narrated by a Chicago voice artist named Lauren Etzo, and I personally find her voice to be quite captivating. So in this clip, she reads a small excerpt from the novel that precedes the opening prologue. So please enjoy.
April 1282. I've forgotten much about my childhood years, but I remember the lava, the roaring fountain of red, molten rock erupting from the black earth, the glowing orange serpent slithering down the flanks of the volcano, deliberately, violently. Yet in the path of its devastation came new growth from the ugly soil, new life, a new era. I am lava. I am Siciliana.
Very dramatic stuff there. So reflecting back on that night sitting in my nanu's gondola, the night I was spiritually knighted and instilled with his values, little did I realize how fully and completely I would actually follow in his footsteps, not only in the writing of Siciliana, but also in a curious little incident that would transpire a few months after I published the book. And I'd like to tell you about that right now. So back in September of this year, I had the incredible honor of being invited to participate in my hometown of Milwaukee's 2022 Festa Italiana celebration. It was a fantastic event, sold out crowd, and in attendance that weekend was my little cousin Emmanuel, pictured here getting his book signed by me. And Emmanuel came up to me and he told me this story about how his teacher asked everyone in the class to bring a book in to read during their quiet time. And of course, he decided to bring in Siciliana. And it wasn't until I was driving home back to Chicago that night when the gravity of that moment truly hit me. So here was this 12-year-old kid whose first introduction to his own heritage was not The Godfather or Goodfellas, but an empowering and celebratory action-adventure tale about Sicily and Sicilian culture. Here was a kid who got to see his older cousin celebrating his culture in an exciting and an engaging way, much like I did with my nanu growing up. And in that quiet moment between us at Festa, everything seemed to come full circle. Here I was, now I, the old knight, knighting the young squire before me and instilling him with the Treviso family's noble values. And so it is, I have the esteemed honor of not only carrying on my nanu's name, but also in continuing to carry on his values of celebrating our great Sicilian culture through acts of creativity and conservation. And I hope I'm making him proud. Grazie.